Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Cesar, and I'm very glad here to present this webinar today. We're going today step by step see the Alteryx Server installation and its system settings configuration. So first, let me do the proper self-introductions. Some of you here today might remember me from the last session with Fernando, and I work with enablement and training team here at Data Meaning. I've been working with Alteryx for almost 6 years now. And during these years, I've been working on BI projects using all kinds of tools, but mainly Alteryx, Alteryx Designer, Alteryx Server, and the ClickSense solutions. Also, I'm Alteryx Designer, Server, and Partner certified. And now for the 7th time, for those who are watching us since the beginning of this webinar series, Data Meaning, we are a boutique business intelligence consultancy founded in 2005. We provide end-to-end solutions using the best tool available to address any problem that is data related. So we are here to help. And so follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube for more content. So let's take a quick recap on our role in this webinar series. We have seen sessions 1 to 6 so far, where we have seen topics for the Alteryx servers and users, developers, gallery, and server admins. In today's webinar we're going to be totally focused on the server admins, since we're going to talk about Alteryx server installation and deployment. So session 7. So let's begin session 7 and what we're going to cover. So first, I'm going to speak about the installation itself, which is pretty straightforward. Then we're going to go to the system settings configurations, where I'm going to see with you all the details within the complete server environment in a single noded environment. And then next, I will check if the installation and the configuration are working as expected, doing some simple testing, but not them all, since we know how to use the gallery on previous sessions. And finally, I will share with you some tips and best practices and answer any questions that you might have about this topic. So, okay, let's begin. So the server installation. Before beginning, a little disclaimer for this webinar. I am not covering a server upgrade today, since it has many topics and checks that we should be aware of. But we surely can think of another webinar if you guys want to. So this is the disclaimer. I'm going to do a fresh installation and a complete one. So let's begin. So first, let's take a quick peek at the must-haves to start the installation. So the mandatory checklist. So first, we have to check the recommended version, meaning that we should be aware of the version we want to install. In this webinar series, we are using the new 2002.1 version, but you and your company might want a previous one, and it is okay. But remember that each version might have different minimum and recommended machine requirements. And also, we must have a type of deployment. So Alteryx Servers is window-based and performs very well in both physical and virtual environments, such as AWS or Azure. So we must have a Windows Server 2012 or later. We must have administrative privileges, which means we have to be a local administrator or higher on the installation machine. And finally, we need to download the installers with a license key. So the license can occur both offline and online. And we have the option to license it from the Alteryx Designer. So this is the mandatory, the checklist. We need to begin the installation. And also we have the checklist that is optional. But can be very handy at the moment of this installation if we know that we must have this information and we want to use it. So for example, the best practice is knowing that we must install the server on a separate drive from the local operating system. So normally the Windows server is installed on a C drive, and we're going to install Alteryx in another drive and another partition. And during the installation, we will have the option to install the predictive analytics package if needed, but be aware that even after installing the package, Python and R libraries still must be imported or installed. So also, if we have an MSMTP information, ODBC drivers, the chosen web address for the gallery, which is the user interface, and the SSL certificate, if you have it, since you can use them all during the server configuration. However, these are not mandatory to start or complete the installation. So, having checked all the points in the mandatory checklist, we begin by downloading the executable program from Alteryx download page with a valid Alteryx login account and a valid license associated to this account. So we just go to license.alteryx.com. Also, it can be downloads.alteryx.com. We search for the Alteryx server. And you can, as you can see, we have the option to download all the Alteryx products. So Alteryx Intelligent Suite, the drivers that we might need, the data package, and Alteryx Designer as well. So then, again, about the mandatory checklist, I've chosen the version that I want to install, 2022.1. And then after installing it, after downloading it, I just have to run it as an administrator in my Windows Server environment. Going to take a while to verify the contents, and then there's a pop-up that we're going to start the installation. So as you can see, the installation is going to be on the F drive program files, then Alteryx, which is separated from the C drive where the Windows Server is installed. So the installation is pretty straightforward. So just accept the license agreement, then click next. Then we're going to wait some minutes for the installation to run. Once it is completed, we can configure the server now, close and run Alteryx Designer later, or install predictive tools. In this case, I've chosen to install the predictive tools as well, because it's just going to take some more minutes. And then I've chosen the R package. I see the R packages that are going to be installed on my computer. Then just wait for some more minutes, and then I can finish the installation. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And after installing, we have to configure. So first, let's see what we have just installed. So we just downloaded the Alteryx server. And so what have we just installed? What we're going to configure. So giving just a little bit of spoiler of the next session, we're going to configure in the system settings, the components, how the components are going to be connected. So we can see, this is going to be the spoiler for the next session. So where we're going to see the Alteryx server architecture. So what we are seeing here is the single node environment. So we can see the system settings that we're going to do right after this single node environment graph, that they are much like these arrows as pieces of information to enable and connect each component of the architecture. In this session, I'll be configuring a complete Alteryx server, which means a single node environment again, and basically one machine with all these components together. So just one machine with all these enabled. Again, the next session is all about Alteryx architecture, and we're going to take a deep dive into different architectures depending on many variables of the server environment administration. So having said that, let's start with the system settings. So the icon, which will be this one, will be appear on your Windows Server desktop. Just double click it, and we start with the welcome page for the system settings, which will display the default status of the current server. So if you see it is all enabled, like this is pretty much a single node environment for now. If we see just one lighted as green, for example, we could identify that this machine is the node for the controller, the worker, or the gallery, for example. So since it is a single node environment, we have them all enabled, just like the diagram that we have seen previously. So first, we set up the environment. So this is where we define which components of the server are going to be enabled on this machine. So the first two options, designer only and designer and scheduler only, are quite rare among the clients, but it is possible. This is the first one is going to enable only the Alteryx Designer in the machine, so multiple users can access this machine to develop and run workflows. The second one, Designer and Scheduler only. The users can run and schedule their jobs, but do not have access to the gallery, which is the user interface, the server user interface. So for these first options, we could ask, so why would someone choose these options? Why would someone choose not to have the scheduler or not to have the gallery on the server installation? So, well, normally they don't. So this is very rare among the clients. But remember that behind an Alteryx Designer, not the server, we also have kind of a system settings. And once we installed, for example, the designer on our machine, probably we have these options enabled, the designer only on the designer and scheduler only. So this is the reason why these is two options. But when we are installing the server, not very rare to be choosing these two options. What we want is the complete Alteryx installation. So in configuration, which is going to enable the entire server architecture to run on this machine. So the designer, the scheduler, the server user interface, which is the gallery. And this is how we choose this machine to be the single node environment. So having a complete Alteryx server enabled. So, and finally, since it is a single node for the complete Alteryx server, when we want to create a multi-machine deployment of the server, so I can choose the custom. So in custom, I will, for example, enable just the worker, just the controller, or just the gallery. So for example, in one machine, I can install Alteryx Server, and in the system settings, I just enable the controller. And in another Windows Server instance, I'm going to install the server again, and then enable the worker and make the two computers to communicate each other. So again, we're going to see this in the next section too, how to scale the server. So last option, send server usage data when enabled. Is going to authorize Alteryx to collect data usage for each job run. This is going to include manual and scheduled runs. So Alteryx is going to use this information to plan future enhancements and prioritize fixed and features. But if you can opt out to sending this usage data to Alteryx if you like to. And what kind of usage data the Alteryx is going to be collecting. So basically version of the server running the job, the serial number of the server installation, the job schedule, the job ID, the date and time the job was run, and errors, warnings, conversion errors, and messages. This is this information that we're going to be sent to Alteryx, not sensitive ones. So moving on. We have the global workspace in the environment to set. So this is the root location for file storage, and therefore we need to have a large disk capacity. So Alteryx is going to put all the staging, all the logs, all the files that it needs to write on a hard disk on this directory. So be aware that the best practice is also to use the same hard disk that we have installed the Alteryx server. So, okay, so just to keep in mind, this is going to save the log files, database files, and temporary files, the global workspace. Now you can go to controller configuration. So we are here. So we have configured the environment, and now we're going to start to configure the controller. So first we have the token, which is a secret key that connects workers and the machine through Designer. So imagine that you have a designer installed on your computer on a Windows 10, for example. This token is used to make machines connect to each other. So that way we can schedule workflows on a user side machine, for example. So if you want to schedule a workflow to run on your machine instead of on the server, then you need this token to connect them both. Also, in a multi-noded environment, you need this token to connect the controller machine to the worker one. So again, talking about multi-node environment, then we're going to, this is the secret where everything is going to be connected, the controller token. It is possible to regenerate this token in case it turns compromised. Also, we have the workspace where the controller stores temporary or cached files. And again, it must be in a location where large amount of files can be placed. Next, we have the logging. So we have the option to choose what information to save and permits its rotation. So what that means is that a log file will contain not only warnings and errors, but also events such as services starting and services shut down, execution requests, and all communications between the components. So a high level of logging will capture all messages, but do limit the size of the file into 10 megabytes, for example. But when enabling log file rotation, then it just means that once the file is has reached 10 megabytes, it's going to create another one. So we have the file, enable log file rotation. So high level will capture everything, and low will only log emergency, alert, critical, and error messages. Okay, so next, we're going to enable the controller to alt connect with the designated controller. So this is recommended to leave it as it is, leave it enabled. Again, we can enable this machine to handle requests for rendering insights in the server, as you can see, you have seen in previous sessions. So enable insights and also enable the AMP engine. So the controller can run workflows that use the Alteryx multi-threaded processing engine, so the AMP engine, and which in most cases offers improved performance of workflows. But if you enable it, then you also need to set at least one worker to run the AMP engine. And we're going to see more on the session engine here, right in the end. So just going to enable a new AMP engine to get improved performance of workflows. Okay, next, the database type. So first, a quick explanation. The controller needs to orchestrate the execution of workflows and handle many other operations. So it is a location where it can maintain the available workflows, the queue of requests, and results data, for example. So critical information to the functioning of the servers is stored here in the persistence layer. So we have first the database type. So 3 options here: the SQLite, recommended for local deployment without the gallery, which is the user interface again; the embedded MongoDB for heavy usage with gallery deployment; and also a user-managed MongoDB, which is your own implementation of MongoDB with Scrum authentication. This could be in another machine and even in a Linux machine. So this is the only component where can be deployed into a non-Windows machine when we are talking about scaling out. And again, we are going to see this more on next sessions. Moving on, data folder. So data folder, this is where the database files are going to be stored, both if you choose SQLite or embedded MongoDB. And if it is user managed, then this will be disabled as it is configured in your MongoDB instance. Choosing the advanced database connection will allow you to use the advanced connection strings to connect to MongoDB, such as for TLS, SSL, replica sets, sharding, and MongoDB Atlas. Okay, so next database will be automatically populated if you're using embedded MongoDB. The admin password is for MongoDB administrators to set up backups and replica sets, and the password is used by all components to communicate with MongoDB and to create user report that connects to the database. So important to differentiate these two passwords. Then, if you choose the user managed, then just to specify this information required with the one that you have on your site. And moving on, persistence options. So the database will maintain a history of workflow results, schedules and updated files. So we can flag these for deletion after a specific number of days to save the hard disk space. So if we want to enable it to delete queue and results after some days, the recommended is about 180 days for every one of this. And the first one is going to apply to completed jobs and workflow results. The second one applies to schedules that have a state of completed. And the third one is going to delete uploaded files that were uploaded into the gallery through analytical apps. So if you leave it as it is, like this, 0, then the items will remain on the gallery indefinitely, the persistence layer indefinitely. So be aware of that. So next, the controller mapping. So workflows have map questions and map input tools. They use tiles for handling maps. So in this session, we can configure the machine to act as a map controller and define the threshold for the tile and the layer caching. So caching map tiles and the reference maps needed to handle will increase performance. So the bigger the number we put it here, the best the performance will be. And also the bigger the time to leave number is, the faster the response will be, but only if the request was previously made. So this is something to be aware of. And also the downside is that it will take up more memory and disk space once the performance get better. So maximum cache is the maximum number of map tiles stored in memory. So we have basically 0.4 megabytes of each tile. It's going to consume 0.4 megabytes of memory. This cache is going to be the maximum amount of space allocated for cache map tiles images. And reference layer time to live is the amount of time to maintain a map reference layer. So the map that we see in the background when we are doing some mapping analysis, and geospatial analysis too. Moving on to worker configurations. So we have the worker general. So remember that the worker handles the execution of workflows, and therefore we need a place where all temporary or cached files and unpacked workflows are saved when execution is needed. So this is where we're going to configure the path for it. And again, we need to point to a location that is safe to store large amount of files. Next, we can allow server to manage workflows running simultaneously. So when we allow Alteryx to automatically calculate the number of workflows running simultaneously, it will calculate at the service start based on available CPU and memory. So if you want to set this number manually, remember the rule of thumb, which is the number of physical cores divided by 2. And remember that 1 for workflow means 1 engine. If the number is set too high, so above the recommended, then we might experience poor job throughput, poor job results, and stability issues or general performance issues. So be aware of that. So don't imagine that just increasing this will get you to run more and better simultaneous workflow. So the next one, cancel jobs running longer than. Selecting this will force jobs to be canceled after a certain amount of time, which will free up system resources. So the best way to define this number is to know more about the workflows that you have in your server and see the average time it takes them to complete. And also keep in mind that this forced cancellation will only affect scheduled jobs and not manual runs. Okay. So quality of services. So the quality of service will determine which jobs each worker is going to run. Therefore, this is very particular in an environment of multiple workers deployed. So again, a multi-node environment. So we have 0 as low, 1 medium, 2 high, 3 critical, 4 chained apps application execution, 6 workflow validation requests, and we do not have a 5, and I don't know why. So for example, having a worker set to the quality of service of 3 will set this machine to handle only priority level jobs that are critical, for example. So in a single node environment like ours here, the quality of service should be 0, which means that the quality is low, which means that the worker will handle any request that comes to him. Okay, next job assignment. So this is for creating tags on a specific worker to run a job. So for example, I can make worker run only jobs that are tagged as machine learning or predictive. So I know that these are workflows that are heavier on performances. So I can assign this worker to run just these tags. So if run unassigned job is enabled, then a job without any tag will also be handled by this worker. So imagine that I have many jobs that I did not create any tags for them, then this worker also is capable of running these jobs that were not assigned. Okay, moving on. Now, a very important concept that answers the question, who is going to be running a workflow once it is on the server? So by default, the worker runs using the local system account, the account that is running the Alteryx service, for example. But we can configure the machine to run as a specific user in this section. So in this case, we are using the domain and the user Akin with his password. So it has a higher hierarchy over the service account. So you can see this pyramid here. So we can also go up in this hierarchy and override this user too. So as we've seen in the gallery, you can also run workflows using credentials defined in the studios. And depending on the server configuration, any artisan or developer can publish workflows to be run with a specific account. So this is the hierarchy. So first, I'm going to try to run with the ones that is defined on the moment of the workflow publication. Then I'm going to look the credentials in studios and the subscription. So, but be aware that this studio and subscriptions may be deactivated in the next versions of the Alteryx. And then we're going to use the run as user credentials, the ones we have defined here. And then if any of these was got for running the workflow, then it's going to use the service account. Okay. So again, let's talk about mappings. So in this section, we can enable the worker to act as a map worker. So let's recall what you have done in the mapping in the controller section. We have enabled the map tile size, the cache, and the distribution. Now we are enabling the worker to render tiles for map questions and map input tool. So the worker is going to render the image, and the controller was just set the numbers for controlling the map. So guess that is it. So the next one will be the insights. As you can see, a quick recap from previous sessions. Insights are interactive dashboards created in the designer and published in the server. So we can also enable the worker to act as an insight worker to handle these insights. So in this section, we can set a maximum number of insights to run simultaneously, the maximum number of insights cached on the worker. And so if one insight consists of a description of a data, of a description in a data file, then each insight cached is a directory that contains these two files. So This is what when you say the number of cache directories. So in number of cache directories is a cache that has a description and a data file. Also, we define the maximum and the minimum port for designated use when rendering. So when we are going to render the insights, we can designate the ports that is going to be used for rendering it. Okay, now we're going to the gallery configurations. So the gallery, like I said many times, is the user interface of the application for publishing, sharing, and executing workflows. So first, the workspace is the location where the temporary files are stored. And again, should point to a place that is safe to large amount of files. Then we have the login directory. So this is this location to store logs about gallery processes and functions. And then we have the base address is the URL that the users will go to the gallery. So inside the server, the base address pointing to localhost will always work. So if I'm inside the Windows Server machine and I type in localhost and gallery, then I'm going to get in the gallery. And if I am outside of the Windows Server machine, then I could use the IP address or a host name supported by the internal DNS services. Also, we can enable SSL if you have a certificate to change this URL to HTTPS instead of HTTP. It will become more safer. Okay, so the default run mode. So this is something very interesting. The run mode determines the workflow that users can or cannot run. So if it is unrestricted, then the users can run any workflow. If the semi-safe and the safe options are able, then the server admin can change the run mode in each workflow within the server admin page, meaning that in both modes, semi-safe and safe, users will be blocked from running workflows that read and write data to a location that is not within the workflow staging directory. So basically, users that have these modes, they will have to publish their workflow with the assets, the database as assets, and they are blocked from running workflows with certain tools. So semi-safe and safe, this applies, but safe mode has a way bigger list of prohibited tools. Also, in the safe mode, they are blocked from running workflows that use events, such as run command or send emails, and also from using data connectors. So semi-safe is pretty blocked everything. Next, a very important step again. So the authentication type, which is going to specify the method of authentication within the Alteryx Gallery. So the options are a built-in, where the users specify an email and password of their choosing to access the server, and is going to be managed by the Alteryx Server. We have the integrated Windows authentication, where users access the server with an internal network credentials. We have Windows authentication with Kerberos, which is the same thing as the previous, but the users will be using Kerberos authentication protocols in this one. And finally, Samuel authentication, where users are going to access the server with an identity provider credential for a single sign-on, such as Okta or Auth0. So we have these types of authentication. So one thing to be extremely careful about this is that the server does not support changing the authentication type after configuration, after we have done with all the system settings configuration. So be careful, because doing so might compromise the gallery functionality. So next, metadata for IDP and Samuel IDP configuration. This is just going to be enabled if we have chosen the Samuel authentication. And the first is selecting the option for obtaining the metadata required for the IDP. so ADP metadata, or X509 certificate. And SAML IDP configurations are the specific information to configure your IDP. So next, we can designate the super administrator for the Alteryx Gallery environment. So if you have chosen the integrated Windows authentication like this one that I have here, then the account type will be auto-completed as you type. So this is just got into my ID and got my user right here. Okay, now this was among the optional informations that we might have before installing the servers. So enabling the SMTP, which is again optional, but it is required if we want to send emails, notifications for server events, such as registering a server account, changing passwords, or sharing a workflow, because this is how the server will notify the users about the events. So this will be tested as we move forward. So again, optional, but it's good to have it. Okay, moving on gallery persistence. We're almost there. So gallery persistence is where we specify where server is going to store information like users, collections, and so on. By default, both web persistence and search persistence are set to use the same settings as those specified on the controller. And we can uncheck this and specify the host, database, name, username, and passwords, but it's recommended to keep the gallery pointing to the same persistence layer to ease the system maintenance and just to give it all, make it all standardized. So by now, we can see that we are going to have 3 databases inside the MongoDB by default. So we had created in the controller, the Alteryx service. And here, 2 more. So the Alteryx Gallery and the Alteryx controller, Alteryx Gallery Lucene. So very important when we use tools like Mongo Compass to access the database. So, but we're going to see this more on next sessions of Alteryx Server. Okay. Engine configuration. So let's recall the engine is responsible for executing workflows. So it's going to need a location where server is going to store temporary files that are used for processing workflows. Again, we have the login directory, a location where the server is going to store output logs, produce it during each workflow processing. And this is blank by default, but if you choose to save this, it is recommended to create a routine to clear this folder after a while, since it can get very big because it's going to save the results for every workflow that is being run. Moving forward to packing staging directory, this is the location where the server is going to save temporarily files associated with the workflow when you edit it in the server. Next, the browse everywhere settings. It is the memory limitation for the sample data set in the output anchor of all tools. So it's the sample rows that we see in the anchor of every tool. But be aware that these are disabled when we are running the workflow in the gallery. Okay, so engine. This setting will tell the worker which engine it can use and therefore which workflow it can run. So remember that in the controller general configuration here up above, we have enabled the AMP engine. And now we are setting this node to run both engines, as we are seeing here. Since this is a single node environment, if just one type of engine is selected here, for example, instead of both engines, just AMP engine or the classic one, all workflows that are published using the other one, not selected, will never run. So imagine that I have only engine AMP here, and I have developed a workflow that do not use the AMP engine. So it will always stay in the queue once we schedule and will never run. So be aware of that. Mainly if you have a single node environment to configure. Next, we can allow server to manage engine resources. So when selected our service, on service startup, the system will perform a check on the hardware resources, which includes logical processors and the total system memory. And based on it, it will calculate automatically. If unchecked, the rule of thumb to set these numbers are the memory limit, which is the same of sort and join memory. So the memory limit is also known as sort join memory. So if the worker and the controller are in the same server, like the ones we have here in the single node environment, then it is the half of the total RAM divided by 2. And then we divide it by the simultaneous workflows that we have chosen previously too. If the machine, so multi-node environment, it has only the worker, then we just have to get the total physical RAM and then exclude 4 gigabits, which is the amount used by the Windows Server installation, and then divided by the number of simultaneous workflows. The default number of processing threads, so defines the number of processing threads, tools, or operations it can use. So generally, it is the number of logical processors on your machine. Okay, now again, we have the option to allow users to override the settings. So enabling this will give the artisans the power to change these numbers by the ones that they have used on their designers while developing the workflows. Therefore, it is recommended to keep this option unchecked to have a server standard. Next, run engine at lower priority. So it is recommended because this will ensure that the Alteryx engine will run at lower priority over all other applications running on the same machine. So by doing so, even the gallery will remain responsive when you are running a large workflow in the background, for example. So this is why we keep it at lower priority. And next, to end it, we have the option to allow user alias to override the system alias, and basically any user alias that is specified in the alias repository can take priority over a system alias. And this is recommended to leave it unchecked as well. Almost there in the engine. So proxy configuration. So instead of connecting directly to an internet host, server can use a proxy. It is going to pull the information from the Windows Internet settings for the user logged in the machine. If there are no proxy settings, like the ones we are seeing here in the screen, then we will not see it within the system settings menu as well. And finally, we have the DCM. So the DCM, again, as we have seen in previous webinars, is the data connection manager, which is a centralized storage for connections that facilitates workflow connections, management, and collaboration. So in DCM mode, we have the option DCM optional, DCM as default, DCM only, DCM enforced. So this is just the option where the password is going to be stored. If it's going to be stored in the workflow, if it's going to be stored on the DCM, if it's going to be only stored on the DCM, or it is going to be stored only in the DCM. If there is a password stored in the workflow, then it's going to be blocked. Also, we have the SDK to support. So again, this is just if we're going to allow or deny or allow all pre-checked for all credentials to access also the DCM. Finally, we're going to end. So we have the finalize screen. We're going to finalize, and it's going to give you this screen to wait for a second. So the Alteryx service is going to restart, and everything is going to shut down for a while, and then it's going to start again. And then finally, we're going to testing. So first we can test once the servers are up, we're going to test it within the server by typing localhost and then gallery. And then we're going to sign in. So if it is a built-in authentication, then just have to create an account for the first time. And if it is a Windows authentication, then we'll be prompted with this pop-up to sign in. And if it's SAML authentication, then it's going to be redirected with your single sign-on option of the one of your IDP. And then again, we're going to see this the next session. So this is going to be the server architecture. And going to see how to all the details in the next sessions and also how to scale this out and up. And then to get more into the administrations, I'm going to teach you which are the services that are running that composes this diagram. So how this reflects on my machine as services. So first we have the Alteryx service, which is startup type is normally automatic and delayed start, and it's recommended to leave it as it is. And we can start the service to log on as local system account, or we can provide another account if you like to. And we have the recovery. So what will happen if the services start is failing? So first failure, the second failure, we're going to restart the service just for you guys to know. And then we have the services, all the other services. So when we are using the designer within the Alteryx server, and also when the server is running some workflows, then we can see the Alteryx engine running. And we have many other services of the Alteryx service. So Alteryx service, service host, authorization host, the map render, the Mongo controller, the web interface, metrics, and the Mongo process itself. Now, some tips. So ODBC and OLEDB driver versions must be installed on the server and the designer. So see the server much like as an extension of your designer, but a place where it's governed, we can share, there's a better performance, and so on. So if you're using an ODBC or OLEDB driver in your machine to develop on a designer, then be aware that you also must have this on the server side, because you're going to push the workflow over there, and over there, the workflow must have the same credentials, the same access, and the same drivers. The data source name, DSN, must be identical in server and the designers. So this is also something to be aware of. Alteryx macros repository mapped to the same folder in server and designers. So this is a good practice. So we're developing and we must use some macros. Then it is a good practice to keep them all on a shared folder where both designers and servers can access. So if you're not using credentials, then the service account must have access to shared folders, data sources when using Windows authentication method. And also, again, additional Python and R libraries need to be installed in server and designers. And I guess that's it. Thought I spoke very, very fast. So, but we have time for some questions and answers, and also to tell you guys that we are in the middle of the webinar series, and these are the sessions that are up next. So we have the architecture and scaling up, something very interesting. Then we have the managing MongoDB and how to troubleshoot your Alteryx server. And then to get over with the series, we get the Gallery API overview and how to build. So be aware of that. They are very interesting webinars to see and follow. Again, a little bit about data mining. We are here to help. So if you guys are having any problem with Alteryx installation, Alteryx backup, Alteryx recovery, and also solving problems with the designer, we can help you. We can perform you the assessment and planning. We can install a server for you. We can migrate it to a newer version, and we can perform health check for you as well. So thank you. So let's see if you have any questions in the Q&A. Let me open it. So we do not have it. So I have only one. The new Hauser is sending yes. Is DCM new to 2021.1? I believe, if not mistaken, the DCM came on 2021.4, but it's even more performatic now in 2021.1. Yes. About the recordings, I would say that I'm going to speak with our marketing team to see what is going on. So please, if you might, please send us a message, and we're going to try to, but actually I'm going to try to see if you're subscribed in our webinar, then you should receive the recordings. So I'm going to check with my marketing team to see what is going on. So I guess that's it. So thank you all for the patience and for being here. And thank you all, and we see you next week, and I see you next time.